Welcome to the IoT podcast show. As always, I'm your host, Tom White. Today, I'm joined by Marcus Jones. Marcus Jones is the Chief Technology Officer and Managing Director at Weeve. Weeve is an IoT platform for industrial data. Marcus has a heavy background in engineering and a real passion for deep tech, realizing the potential of blockchain, but also how that works with IoT. This is going to be a really interesting talk and certainly one for all you tech lovers out there.
Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today on the IoT podcast show.
Tom, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
Marcus, could you start by speaking a little bit about your background in IoT and how it is that you've come to be the Managing Director and CTO at Weeve?
I'm a bit of a newcomer to IoT, actually. So I started at a research institute in Austria, and we were building energy design, so design for renewable energy systems and photovoltaics and other types of advanced energy systems. And I was actually simulating a lot of these designs. And simulation is an interesting approach when you think about IoT in reality. Simulation is sort of an idealized form of that. I could always know the entire state, the thermodynamic state of the absolute entire system, like every electricity flow, every mass flow rate, temperature. So this is sort of, if we get a little philosophical, like a Platonic ideal of what you can actually learn about a building in real time. And then I was actually responsible for implementing some of the IoT systems, so speccing them out at least, and then supervising on site. And then I learned the reality, is very different from this idealized world. And I started to really think about big data topics, connectivity topics. So another project I had was in Senegal, and it's a remote village project where we had to provide off-grid electricity with photovoltaic systems in Senegal. And then that's a whole other set of issues and challenges, like the connectivity, of course. So you're driving through the savannah. There's no roads. There's no electricity grid. The only thing you see are these huge, massive cell phone towers. So you're driving along and there's nothing, and suddenly there's a huge cell phone tower. So there's connectivity. And then that also leads to a certain IoT framework, right? So it's about keeping data lightweight. When you don't want to send the entire data stream across the 3G network because it's expensive, and connectivity is maybe not the most reliable thing. So that led me to think about a lot of these really innovative topics. Not just IoT and data, but also I started getting really interested in machine learning before it was called machine learning, just statistics, and then there's a lot of momentum behind that, and I decided to make a shift to leave engineering consulting and project management to go back to school essentially and learn about data science, blockchain, where I started out a blockchain startup in Berlin. And this blockchain startup was really a formative experience for me. So it's sort of a cluster of innovation, and I'll never forget the experience I had there with these amazing engineers and the whole team, and started to think about their application was in the data space. So how do we democratize access to data, marketplaces for data powered by the blockchain? Mm-hmm. So it was during my time at this startup, I was at a hackathon in Berlin. So I loved going to hackathons because it's a great way to just get thrown into new technologies. It was an Ethereum blockchain hackathon in Berlin, and one of the sponsors was a venture studio here in Berlin called Next Big Thing. And I loved what they were doing. They had a little demonstrator of it was a rowing machine connected to the Ethereum blockchain. So the more you would row, the more tokens you would accumulate, and you could use that to buy something like in a vending machine. So it's just a really cool little POC. So I thought, this is a really interesting group of people, and started talking with them about some of my ideas. And finally, they came and said, we have this startup that was founded in 2017 as a bit of a research, like a joker in the deck of cards, I would call it. So it was a startup called Weeve, and they had some intellectual property, they had some blockchain IP, and they said, would you like to take this portfolio company? So that the original team had left already, and they had this company, and that's how I joined Weeve as the re-founder, I would say, of Weeve in 2020.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the best things about hackathons in general, right? Is that you get thrown into complicated challenges and can work with peers, but also from a networking perspective, right? So you've been able to meet this business and rejoin as a founder of the company. I mean, it's really impressive. Obviously, your background and Next Big Thing, has a number of portfolio businesses and projects on as a company. One of the key things that we see time and time again, Marcus, and perhaps you can shed some light on this, is how can a startup business, albeit a portfolio company of a larger organization, how can you compete against a landscape dominated by such massive players in the IoT field?
Yeah, the IoT space has a lot of challenges that I think a lot of your previous guests have done a great job highlighting, that make it difficult, especially for a startup to approach the market. So let's consider, especially if we consider B2B business models instead of B2C, of course, that's also very challenging. B2B has longer lead times. You need to develop a relationship with an enterprise. So you ideally have a network that you can fall back on. So you either have experience with it or you have an existing network. So already that can lend itself well to the hypothesis of Next Big Thing, the venture studio, where they say, we understand these challenges, and therefore we provide a backbone for you to fall back to. Yeah, so they provide a network. Another challenge is the capital required to actually build hardware. If you're in that space, I mean, in any case, you need to interact with hardware. So going back to NBT, one other advantage they offer is to have a fully equipped lab with a team of embedded engineers that you can rely on. So yeah, the advantages though, there are a lot of advantages to being a startup. So one is simply you're coming at it and you probably have a green field in front of you, right? So it means you don't necessarily have a legacy of an existing IoT suite or an existing set of protocols that you need to use if you're already a big enterprise, right? So they might have some existing industrial IoT protocols that you have to use. They might have some infrastructure that you might have to use. And so that just lends itself to the word being agility, right? So a startup is able to react to the current state of the market in the first instance, and then also changes in the market, just because we're smaller, right? So we can very quickly make a decision without needing to, file the forms in triplicate.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the best things about being a smaller business is that agility, and often is the case of large organizations that they can't fundamentally change their business model or react quickly enough, and nothing's been more evident than that since last year, of course, with the pandemic, Marcus. And businesses reprioritizing, focusing and changing where they are, and it's widely spoken about the ventilator shortage and some of the companies that joined together to work to create ventilators early on during the first lockdowns of the pandemic. So completely agree with you on that. Thank you so much for sharing it. In terms of Weeve and the wider picture of what we now call IoT, of course, it's gone by machine to machine and gone by various other names in years past. But what do you foresee as the main challenges in mass adoption, but also funding as well from sort of private equity and VCs?
So many challenges. I think we have enough history we can look back and say that there is not really a more complex space than IoT. So let's talk about one of our key assumptions of what the challenges are. One of them being fragmentation, and that means we have so many different protocols, different hardware standards, different application areas. So IoT, Internet of Things, what's the thing? We have different market segments. We have enterprise IoT, we have consumer IoT, micromobility, on and on. So that's already one of the big challenges, is simply the fragmentation of or heterogeneous, we can use as a word. So it's really, this thing is not like the other. And then how do you then integrate it? Integration, that's another big challenge. So you would typically have in an enterprise, you might have a one-off project. Let's digitalize the factory. So let's stand up a team. Let's hire some consultants. Here we go. We've got this digitalization project underway. And then you find out, okay, it's working, yeah. And then you find out, oh, you need to change something. So reusability. How do you then, all that work that you've invested, if you, like, once the project is stood up, you might need to decrease the team, and then they're there for operations, but they're not necessarily equipped to take the next evolution in IoT. So to take advantage of machine learning, let's say, at the edge. And so then you need another project, another implementation project. So reusability is another challenge that I think is coming from the fragmentation side. And then what we're really interested in at Weeve is the issues related to data custody. So data custody, data privacy, ownership of data. One of your previous guests, unfortunately, I don't recall the name. So I was listening to some of your podcasts. One of your guests said something along the lines of, IoT data streams are equivalent to revenue streams, right? Maybe not equivalent, but they're definitely leading to value. So by gaining access to the state of my factory, I can very quickly make a decision. I could send a maintenance team to fix it. I know my uptime. I can optimize. So that data is very valuable, but it's also private. So there are several cases. One case I can recall of a big corporate wanted to use 3D printers for manufacturing, and they learned of a manufacturer who had a 3D printer which would be suitable. And then they, during the project implementation or the even pre-feasibility phase, they found out, oh yeah, you have this. What's this port here? You have open to the outside, and they say, yeah, this is so we can log in and we can see the state of your system. And that was a no-go immediately, right? So because you could actually from looking at the raw data streams, you can already see perhaps what is this company producing? How many widgets are they producing per hour? Or something else that might lead you to gain a competitive advantage. You just can't take that risk. So the data custody is a really interesting challenge in the IoT space that we see coming up more and more. And then the final one, and again, these are three main assumptions of what are the main challenges coming in as a startup. The other one would be security, right? So, and that's related to data custody and privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely agree, and I think the person you mentioned that on the previous show is absolutely right. Data is such a valuable stream of income these days, and you see it from the mass adoption of data centers out there, right? With big name brands, Amazon, Google, etc., spending millions and millions on this because it's truly the future, and harvesting that to create a direct revenue stream about what should I be doing, where should I be using this, and so on and so forth. And I think that's one of the main benefits, this big data effect in IoT. Marcus, you've mentioned a few times, both in writing and in talks that you've done, about the phrase machine economy. Now, for our listeners who may not be aware of that, what does that mean to you, and why should we take notice of that?
Yeah, so I was really excited to talk with you about this topic. So at Weeve, we have a platform approach to IoT, but with my experience, I'm really I'm quite bullish on decentralization. So let's take blockchain as an example, and that's, I believe, one of the building blocks of the machine economy, will be one of the building blocks of the machine economy. So you can debate whether or not we're already living in the machine economy. So we already talked a little bit about data being valuable. So I think the next evolution is machines that are able to autonomously transact with each other, so to exchange value between each other without human interaction. I think that's, like I said, I love talking about this stuff because this is, at Weave, we have our, let's say in our product roadmap, we have this platform approach to IoT to enable people to gain access to insights about their data at the edge and to send that to third parties in a secure way. And a lot of the technology there coming from blockchain, for example, is just waiting for implementation. So I'm always designing for this next version of IoT, let's say, and that I do believe is the machine economy. And maybe I can tell a bit of a story to make it a bit more concrete. So if you consider the let's pretend for a moment that we have a level 5 self-driving vehicles out there, so they're able to autonomously navigate. And so consider, if you will, that these autonomous vehicles are also autonomous in the sense that they can make their own decisions. They can negotiate with their environment. So, for example, let's take a car. It can make a decision based on the data it receives from other vehicles about what is the density in the city. Yeah, and they might choose to distribute themselves in an optimal way. So that would be one input. You know, how am I competing with other vehicles to provide mobility? And another clear input would be, you know, what is the predicted density of my passengers, right? So they could negotiate with other vehicles and say, yeah, let's you know, we know there's a big event coming. We saw this from the Google newsfeed or something. Let's line up around the block, and maybe we can provide connectivity. Or another classic example in this space would be negotiating with charging stations for you know, can you provide me a good rate, and are you close enough to me that it makes sense for me to make the trip to this charging station, and then connect to the charging station, and as you're being charged, you transact, you pay for the electricity that's being delivered. So that's, you know, take that vision and apply it to mobility, to the connected digital factories, to satellites, and it just, yeah, I'm gonna start vibrating if I talk about it too much. It's just so exciting that I'm, like I said, I love talking about this stuff. I feel like I'm at just a great position. I feel like I'm really at the beginning of the journey because it's really the beginning of the machine economy right now.
Yeah, totally. I'm very enthusiastic about it myself, right? This is the reasons why we're so engulfed in this industry. You know, it's evident. Anyone that's listened to Klaus Schwab or read his book on the fourth industrial revolution would be completely aware about just how poignant this shift is. And it's great to hear someone so passionate like yourself, Marcus. One of the interesting things that you mentioned there is decentralization and talking about blockchain. Now, in my view, and what I've seen in the past is I've seen a lot of people talk about ML, AI, blockchain, IoT, and they've really used it as kind of buzzwords, right? Because they don't really understand. They don't they don't really understand it, and they talk about it. But you know, you're clearly a good authority on this. I'd love to understand your view on the combination of IoT and blockchain. And when we talk about IoT devices and the decentralization about that, can you go into a bit more depth about what that means to you and also within Weave?
Yeah, great. So I think I used the word bullish already. So I do, you know, people ask me the question quite often. Yeah, there's so much hype. Right now we're in the middle of another hype cycle of blockchain. Well, let's say from you know, Dogecoin, right? It's exploding right now. Elon Musk is tweeting about it. Bitcoin, Ethereum is on a tear. We've seen the cycle go up and down. There's a lot of volatility, and there's a lot of hype around it. So that being said, I do believe that there are fundamental primitives that the blockchain enables that give it legs to really change the way that our world works. So yeah, to talk a little bit about the history of blockchain, we have the Bitcoin as the prime mover in the space, and some of the fundamental primitives I talked about are the ability to talk about ownership in a new way. It solves an issue of ownership in the digital world. So possession intents of the law, and that only applies to the physical space, right? So if I'm holding my cell phone and you can't take it away from me, that's my cell phone, more or less, and I can protect my property, right? Because the other thing is there's only one of them. Now, if you talk about a JPEG image, what does it mean to own a JPEG image right now? There are things like copyright, but ultimately, a JPEG image is fungible, to use another buzzword. So NFTs, non-fungible tokens, but it means that this JPEG image can be copied infinitely many times, and once that happens, you've lost the rights to that in some sense, because you don't have the right to prevent somebody from showing it to somebody else, right? So that's one fundamental primitive that the blockchain really enables you to work with. So let's take just the Bitcoin, right? Another very famous quote from in the blockchain space is "not your keys, not your coins." So if you have a private key to your blockchain wallet, then you own the rights to that Bitcoin, for example. So that's enabled by the decentralized ledger. Yeah. So if I lose control of my keys, I've lost my Bitcoin. But if I keep my keys private and secure, then I own that Bitcoin. The same can be applied to something like a JPEG. Not in the sense that people could still copy it, but if I own the trace of that JPEG, or if I store the whole JPEG as data in the blockchain, and it's associated with my private key, and in the blockchain it would be stored as a public key, but that gives me, I'm allowed to say, like, at least I was the first one to register this JPEG, for example, or I was the first one to, let's try to bring it back to IoT. I was, I as the firmware manufacturer, I've stored the hash, so that's like the signature of my binary executable.
Yeah.
That's associated with a public key, which is in turn associated with my organization. So that allows you as a factory owner to say, or let's take a device manufacturer. It allows the device manufacturer to say, this firmware is actually produced by me, the manufacturer, and you can trust that. So if you in turn on the device side, you want to guarantee that this firmware is from the manufacturer, you could query the blockchain and say, hey, does this hash match? If it does, then yeah, this is the right firmware. So that type of fundamental primitive enabled by that fundamental concept enabled by the blockchain is what I mean when I say I'm still bullish on this technology, because of course you could do this with a centralized database, right? But it's not so explicit is better than implicit, and that's what the blockchain does. It puts it to the forefront. Ownership, rights, security, all of these things are empowered by the blockchain.
Yeah, fantastic. That's such a great answer, and thank you for going in depth onto that, Marcus. What does this mean, for the average person on the street, right? So, a more high-level explanation. What can the benefit, and what does the future look like of leveraging IoT and blockchain together for the average consumer?
So I think so I always, when I'm giving a conference talk, I often start with a question, just a show of hands, who is currently using the blockchain on a daily basis? And I'm involved in a lot of technical conferences, and typically, people raise their hands because they might have some some token somewhere, some Bitcoin. And then I ask, but are you using the blockchain as a utility token? Are you using it for some other utility other than just a store of value or a medium of exchange? And then I see most of the hands go down. And so I just wanted to preface this with, it's a bit of a vision exercise right now. There were a lot of promises about the utility of the blockchain. It would transform everything. It would replace traditional databases. It would replace authentication and identity. So we're still waiting for this transformation to happen. And to go back to even the first question, we're right now in this again with a lot of attention paid to blockchain technologies for reasons that I think are great, right? They store value and decentralized finance, really amazing technologies, but there's so much more coming. So IoT and blockchain for the average person. So I think there are a lot of benefits for privacy, again, so like private data, keeping ownership of your data and the rights that you have are, I think, some of the most powerful advantages. There are interesting applications in incentivization, to incentivize people to behave in a certain way, to be rewarded to behave in a certain way. Of course, it's, I don't want to go into like this dystopian future where we're controlled by machines and technology. So of course we have to be, cautious and fair. But I think we can build fairness into the systems, and we can build transparency into the systems. So there's a fundamental primitive or more advanced concept in the Web3 community, so Web 3.0 community, talking about on-chain governance, so the ability to vote and make decisions in a democratic way, and to maintain control in a democratic way again. So to step away from having to rely on big enterprises or governments. We can take matters into our own hands. And so that's a pretty general statement. And I think for the average consumer, these things, it should become at a certain point. So it should become, the average consumer should care as much about blockchain as much as they care about an SQL database, right? So it's, if you're using Spotify, you're getting the benefit of all this database technology, but ultimately it's just a better experience for you, and that's what I see as the final evolution of this technology.
Yeah, Marcus, absolutely fantastic insights, and you're a real futurist when it comes to bleeding edge tech and what's going to happen in the near future for us all. It's been a real pleasure having you on the IoT podcast show. Just so that our listeners can find out more, Weeve, I assume you're on social media. Where can people find out more about your position at Weeve?
Sure. So we are most active currently on LinkedIn. So I should say Weeve is spelled W-E-E, and our website is weeve.network. Those are the two best places to catch us. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Yeah. Fantastic. Marcus, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's been great to philosophize with you about deep tech.
I've enjoyed it.